It suddenly struck me that that tiny pea, pretty and blue, was the Earth. I put up my thumb and shut one eye, and my thumb blotted out the planet Earth. I didn't feel like a giant. I felt very, very small. So the first photograph ever taken by a person standing on the surface of another world. Now the astronauts had cameras attached to them here, as you can see. There were cameras all around the lunar module. And remember, Michael Collins is making many, 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 many orbits around the moon, and he is taking photos, and there's cameras around the command service module. So thousands and thousands of photos are taken. The astronaut photos, they're not aiming and focusing. They're just shoot, 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 take lots of photos, as one does. And then you come home and you process and show off your best photos to the world. Of course, in the 21st century, if Apollo 11 landed on the moon present day, first post. Or the wonderful text world. Stupid gloves. Actual photo here, planting of the flag. The flag planted on the moon today actually is white, and that is because the sun's radiation has essentially bleached it out. If you've ever left something out in the sun for a long period of time, maybe it gets left on the dashboard of your car, you retrieve it, and it's been bleached through. That's essentially what happened to the flag, which I think is kind of cool, because it's a white flag, oftentimes interpreted as peace. And wonderful footprint here. The footprint, the one that is most used in images, particularly as in 2019 we had the 50th celebration of this event, and this image was used quite a bit in commemorative things. This footprint is taken by Buzz Aldrin, who, the second human on the moon, he was returning to the LEM as they're about to ascend back to rendezvous with Michael Collins in Columbia. And he looks back, take one look back at where you were in this, taking the historical moment, and he sees that footprint in the moon's surface, and he takes a picture of it that obviously well known in worldwide use. The footprint that people will put, this is the first step on the moon, it's actually Buzz's footprint. So a few years ago, the Smithsonian decided to actually make a cast of Neil's footprint. So the same boot type used for the Apollo landings, and put his to be memorialized at the Smithsonian. If you think about it, aliens. Alien just means foreign, not from around here. Aliens invaded the moon on July 20th, 1969. And to really freak us out, Neil Armstrong was the first person to land on the moon. Neil A backwards is alien. Oh. Welcome, Earthling. Sometimes you gotta make sure your steps don't hurt others. Little comic here, not necessarily declaring that there was life on the moon that we upheaved. I just think, Buzz, our footprints will be on the surface of the moon forever because there's no wind to blow away the moon dust. She'll be apologizing. It's a pretty bad pun. To take a look at their footpaths of how far they traipsed, this is the lunar module, and this is put up against the backdrop of a soccer pitch, and this is the path of Armstrong, path of Aldrin. You don't want to go too very, very far, because what if something happens? So you want to explore, but you don't want to go too crazy. If you're not familiar with soccer pitch dimensions, maybe baseball dimensions will help here. This is home plate, the pitcher's mound. The Lunar Prospector was a satellite launched in 1998, and it was a high-definition spacecraft. It came about after the advent of digital photography, which revolutionized discoveries in astronomy. It really increased the number of discoveries. The Lunar Prospector was a satellite that took images of the moon, and so we now have these great photos from the Apollo manned missions, where this is the Apollo lunar module, and you can see some of the footpaths of Armstrong and Aldrin. Hopefully you have it in your notes or locked in the mind forever. Armstrong, 20th of July, 1969, first human on the moon. Can you imagine? He's got his Snoopy cap, communications carrier assembly. First words that Buzz Aldrin uttered when he stepped on the moon were magnificent desolation. So the day after the famous walking on the moon, what nerve, he went for a walk without me. This is pretty hilarious. Harks back to the Mercury 7 of, everyone competing to want to be the first astronaut in space for NASA. Here, people wanted to be the first to walk on the moon. You're well-educated space exploration fans. You note a little bit of an error with the Gary Larson cartoon. You got it. There's 2 people of the 3 manned crew of an Apollo mission that will walk on the moon. The 3rd person's got to stay up orbiting in the command module, but still a great comic. Come on, dude. Tell me, what's it like to be the first? Hold on, I'm having a Neil Armstrong moment. And this is where I do encourage you as students to have Neil Armstrong moments. We're always rushing to things, and we have these great achievements we looked forward to. We've been counting up to this, counting down to that, and the moment comes, and the day after, you're just like, whoa, that happened already? So be sure to pause and actually make sure you're having a Neil Armstrong moment and being in the moment and recognizing this is what things have been leading up to. I used to joke in my astronomy space exploration classes how wouldn't it have been just so poignant and just so typical if we'd gotten on the moon and there was a little sign from the Soviet Union, you are here, we've been here already, or something like that. And one time a student was actually listening to what I said one time, and they submitted this drawing for me, which I think is glorious. What took you guys so long? So Aldrin, second human on the moon. And 48 years later, here he is donning the same jacket. That's pretty cool, still fits. Then you become so famous, your jacket and your undergarments will be on display in a museum for all to adore. And as I said, this is Buzz Aldrin coming down the LEM module ladder, and his first words were magnificent desolation. There's this very well-known clip for Superman mythos followers from the film. Play that for you here. Maybe I'll play it for you. There it is.
Kneel before Zod!
I was second man on the moon. Kneel before me. I had the wonderful opportunity of a lifetime and many lifetimes to actually meet Buzz Aldrin. It was just fantastic to be standing there right by a human who has walked on the moon. Also able to acquire his autograph. A social media post of his showed one holiday gift-giving time he received a wall nightlight sort of a deal where the light will transition through the phases of the moon. I actually had that before Buzz Aldrin got it, so we have the same toys. You can display in the Smithsonian DC National Air and Space Museum. They have an example of an Apollo lunar suit, which, like the Gemini EVA suits, were their own spacecrafts. The image down here is an example of the layering. Just immense levels of protection needed, certainly cooling, components as well. There's just zoomed in. And, you know, this was back in era. We didn't really have autofocus on the cameras that we carried with us. They weren't cell phones. I really need to go to the Air and Space Museum in the world of modern technology, or just improve my photo skills. The middle layers of spacesuits are blown up like a balloon to press against the astronaut's body. Without this pressure, the astronaut's body would boil. So that's why there's so much of the liquid that's in these suits. In this area of the Smithsonian where they're highlighting the different layers of the suit, they have this huge panorama, this great motif going around the walls of this display, showing all the different layers that the astronauts had to put on. And this is just one of the walls. It just wraps all the way around. So this is your EMU, the Extravehicular Mobility Unit. This is an acronym, or an initialism. We say EMU rather than EMU. Extravehicular Mobility Unit. And really a designed spacecraft. Few years, and by a couple decades, Neil Armstrong, in a commemorative moment, wrote this letter to the EMU gang at the Houston Space Center, where he wrote to them, "I remember noting a quarter century or so ago that an EMU was a 6-foot Australian flightless bird. I thought that got most of it right. It turned out to be He goes on to say, "I remember noting a quarter century or so ago that an emu was a 6-foot Australian flightless bird. I thought that got most of it right. It turned out to be one of the most widely photographed spacecraft in history. That was no doubt due to the fact that it was so photogenic. Equally responsible for its success was its characteristic of hiding from view its ugly occupant. Its true beauty, however, was that it worked. It was tough, reliable, and almost cuddly. To all of you who made it all that it was, I send a quarter century's worth of thanks and congratulations." Signed, Neil Armstrong. They have quite elaborate displays in the Smithsonian to mark this wonderful achievement. They have a mock-up, full size to scale. Not people in here, just mannequins. And they do a great job of describing, and you can just, on these cards, and just taking in what it must have been like. Come down that lunar module, be the first to walk on another celestial body. They have mapped out in a mock-up of the LEM module what it'd be like. Remember, this is more of a standing room only vehicle. Just a look at the aluminized plastic films that were used. Some of these materials at the time that President John F. Kennedy made his announcement that we would go to the moon before the end of the decade, took a lot of engineers back because these materials hadn't even been developed yet, hadn't even been thought of. And then there's an actual mock-up of the controls of the lunar module, or the command module. And then the mechanism for the hatch opening for the Apollo 11 capsule. And there is the safe recovery. You'll notice the Navy recovery team a little bit more hazmated up. We had no idea what kinds of things the astronauts might bring back with them from the moon. They just went to a totally different alien environment. Would they bring back contaminants to the U.S. and then onward maybe spread to the entire world? So the quarantine lasted for 21 days. The 3 astronauts immediately placed in this quarantine mobile unit. It wasn't just a tiny little sequestered box. It was a full-length mobile unit, and they stayed in there for 3 weeks. They were the crew of manned Apollo missions that landed on the moon who spent the most time in quarantine. Once tests revealed that there wasn't anything to pick up that would wreak havoc on planet Earth, the quarantines were reduced greatly. This is President Nixon congratulating the astronauts upon this amazing accomplishment. You'll recall that President Kennedy unfortunately had been assassinated, so wasn't alive to see what came from his declaration. The actual hatch Apollo 11 on display in the Smithsonian, as well as the actual Apollo 11 command service module. This is Columbia. This is a replica, what was left on the surface of the moon from the Apollo mission. The here men set from planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969. We came in peace for all mankind. Signed Nixon rather than Kennedy, who first established this goal. Those of you who had the Astronomy of the Universe course, you know that I feel like it's sponsored by Carl Sagan. There's a different perspective about the event. For me, the most ironic token of that moment in history is the plaque signed by President Richard M. Nixon that Apollo 11 took to the moon. It reads, "We came in peace for all mankind." As the United States was dropping 7.5 megatons of conventional explosive on small nations in Southeast Asia, we congratulated ourselves on our humanity. We would harm no one on a lifeless rock. Well, happier thoughts. Neil Armstrong, first man to step foot on the moon, carried with him a piece of the cloth and wood from the original 1903 Wright Flyer. Perspective, I always like to say. When Orville Wright, who helped invent the first working airplane, died, Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, was already 17 years old. Continuing that thinking, it only took 66 years from the Wright brothers' first flight to man walking on the moon. That is an incredible advancement in technology. Just incomprehensible, nearly. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin left one of Yuri Gagarin's cosmonaut medals on the moon to pay tribute to his accomplishment and the world's first man in space. And here is a great moment. You have the first man who went into space, the first woman who went into space, and meeting, congratulating the first man to walk on the moon. Great moments. So before 1969, we thought maybe the moon was made of cheese. It was kind of a common thing in early sci-fi black and white films. Hence these comics. It's not just cheese, Buzz. It's the best cheese ever. You know we have to keep this our secret, right? Uh-oh. Who's this arriving? Take my cheese. I used to worry about sleeping out at night. I used to think that there were spiders on the moon, and that one of them might fall on me while I was sleeping. Now, however, the astronauts have discovered that there are no spiders on the moon. I'm a great believer in our space program. There is more processing power in a TI-83 calculator than in the computer that landed Apollo 11 on the moon. Just ponder that. A single Google search requires more computing power than it took to send Neil Armstrong and 11 other astronauts to the moon. Now, pointing out the computing necessity of the Apollo missions, we must mention the great and wonderful Margaret Hamilton. She's the one standing here with the code that she wrote for the Apollo 11 launch, flight, landing capabilities, and she is credited with the person who came up with the term a software engineer. A few years ago, NASA honored her with her own minifig for LEGO when LEGO released the Women of NASA. So Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong do get a lot of fame and recognition. People tend to know those names. People don't often associate the name Michael Collins with the great lunar landing of July 1969. But if he had not done his job of retrieving those two humans, and Neil and Buzz could possibly have been the first human memorial markers on the moon. So lots of tribute to be credited to Michael Collins. Although having just said that, this is a hilarious comic that I should not laugh at. Welcome home, Apollo 11 astronauts. And does anyone have any questions for Michael Collins about what it was like to stay in the cabin? No, I didn't think so. Okay, back to the heroes. As I said, I should not laugh at that, but I do. So to help recover from my shameful laughing, think about this for Michael Collins. Michael Collins is the only human, living or dead, not contained in the frame of this picture. Michael Collins is the only human, living or dead, that's not in the frame of that picture. That's a pretty amazing claim to fame right there. And on the flip side, John Wilson, 43, Schaumburg, Illinois, not pictured. Absolutely everyone else. So a TV camera was placed not too far away from the LEM to film a lot of these great historical moments. They put a laser beam reflector, a mirror, on the surface of the moon so that Earth could target a laser at that, time how long it took for the light to travel there, and then calculate absolutely precisely how far away the moon is from the Earth. A seismometer, take a little moonquake readings. Here they are by the, or one of them is by the seismometer. And those are the things that we still can see thanks to the Lunar Prospector. So anytime you leave the country of the United States, or most countries, and you return to that country of origin, you have to declare things that you are bringing with you. So the astronauts did fill out their customs form, their general declarations that they are returning with the moon rock and moon dust samples, something they had not originally left the country with. So customs form there. Buzz Aldrin tells this fabulous story of how he filled out the schedule of expenses and amounts claimed. So he wrote down all of the things that were involved in his government-sponsored trip. You know, the going to the moon, the food that you consume while you're on your official business and duty. And he submits this claim of this very preposterous amount. And the government, in return, a $33.31 reimbursement. Had the opportunity to listen to Aldrin talk about this, and he described how what the $33 was the reimbursement for the price of the shuttle, no, not space shuttle, but the taxi service of shuttling him from his home to the Houston Space Center and then back from the Houston Space Center to his home. The owner-creator of Amazon.com, Jeff Bezos, is an avid space exploration enthusiast. He put together a team to search out the ocean to try and recover any of the F-1 engines that are in the ocean. And on March 2012, they were able to find an F-1 engine from the Apollo 11 flight. And these things are an incredible engine. They are able to produce 1.5 million pounds of thrust, 32 million horsepower. It's just insane. So here's an image when they discovered it embedded about 14,000 feet down into the ocean. How do you know it's from the infamous Apollo 11 launch? Well, the materials have serial numbers etched into them, and they're able to verify. So, recovery mission ensued, and I happened to be at the Seattle Air and Space Museum at a time when they were on loan. The F-1 recovery engines were on loan, and had no idea before I showed up to the museum that they were going to be on display. Just pretty outstanding to see these, or this F-1 engine. There's some of the components here separated for view. Incredible. Google Doodle honoring the 40th anniversary of the moon landing, and of course the 50th of 2019. One of the great ways in which the Apollo 11 has been commemorated is through a Lego creation that is the Saturn V that the Lego company decided to actually go ahead and construct and offer to consumers. Had the full capability to deploy the lunar module, so the Apollo capsule and the lunar module there. I made sure the connected pieces to represent the docking. Complete with astronauts and a US flag. And each stage is completely separable and stackable. My favorite thing, though, about the Saturn V Lego kit is how it was intentionally designed to have 1,969 pieces. 1969. Absolutely fabulous, and one of my favorite Lego purchases.